Welcome people to the deep dive session on Sri Lanka's trade landscape, featuring policymakers and industry experts. The panel discussion will feature a mix of policymakers and private sector leaders and will be moderated by Mr. Shiran Fernando, the Chief Economist at the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Shiran, over to you.
Good day everyone and welcome to the Deep Dive Forum session on Sri Lanka's trade landscape. As with other sessions, we have an interesting lineup of both from the public sector as well as the private sector to really provide our audience tuned in a glimpse of Sri Lanka's trade landscape, some of the key interesting things and how things are evolving as well. And I hope in the discussion ahead, we will really get into it. So we have on the panel today, we have Ms. J.M. Bhadrani Jayawardena, who is the Secretary of the Ministry of Trade of the Government of Sri Lanka. And we have Mr. Ananda Dharmapriya, Director General, Department of Commerce. We have from the private sector, two leading industry captains, Mr. Vish Govindasamy, Group MD of Sunshine Holdings and also the Vice Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, and Ms. Shya Vikramasinghe, Group Managing Director, CBL, and also the co-chair of the Ceylon Chamber NAC on trade as well. Both of them will, I think, bring their insights from the private sector and add to the public policy discussion. So without me going on in terms of the context of this session, let me get our speakers right into focus as well. And let me first let them all have introductory remarks before we get into some of the specific nitty-gritty questions as well. So let me first ask the Secretary, Mrs. Jayawardena, to sort of set the context for us in terms of how the government, in terms of its policy on trade, is at the right moment and also how it is evolving.
Yes, well, the government is all out to create a business-friendly environment, and it has created a level ground for local and foreign investors. Foreign investors have been offered an impressive package of incentives in addition to protecting their investment through constitution and legislation. And also, private sector is the key and main partner in economy. It is the engine of the growth as well as backbone of the economy. Government removed unbearable volume of taxes levy of 17% levied on trade turnover, though it was called as value added tax. In addition to their investment, the private sector the tax relax quite a lot of restriction imposed on pre-trade. That process is being continued. And also trade and industrial policies development process started simultaneously at the end of last year. Though those two areas come under two different ministries, conflicting interest of different stakeholders and prevailing ambiguity on positions are expected to be ironed out, making compromises. As a result, clear policies will develop with long-term vision, and for immediate implementations, policies will contribute taking decision fast while making them transparent and predictable. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Let me now shift of attention to the Department of Commerce and its role in terms of market access on the trade landscape.
Yeah, the Department of Commerce is the focal point for the World Trade Organization in Sri Lanka. And over the years, from the establishment of the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs, all the trade diplomats in Geneva have been working towards the development of a predictable and transparent market access. That is an essential element for the smooth flow of goods and services and also investment among the countries in the world. The trade has been recognized as the engine of the growth, and therefore predictable environment, predictable market access on a rule-based system is an essential element. If we look at the market access scenario of Sri Lanka, we have signed bilateral trade agreements with the countries in the region. We are members of regional trade agreements, and also we are member of a fairly large trade agreement which was entered into in late 80s among the developing countries to increase the trade between the countries in the south. When it comes to the market access, there are two ways in which market access is affected, or adversely or positively. Market access using non-tariff measures, like various measures to protect plant, animal and human health, and environmental measures and measures to protect public moral. These non-tariff measures are very important and should not be the general understanding among the member countries of the WTO is that these non-tariff measures are essential to protect human animal lives and health, and which should not be implemented in such a way to create unnecessary obstacles to the trade. Should not be more restrictive than necessary to achieve a legitimate objective. So if we look at that is the non-tariff measure scenario. Then the other measure is the tariff scenario. You can facilitate or you can block the trade flows among the countries using these tariff measures. So when Sri Lanka, as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, we have signed the first bilateral trade agreement with India. So with that, now Sri Lanka in a position to export more than 4,000 products under more than 4,000 tariff lines to the greater Indian market. The architect of these agreements in early 90s, their objective was to create a launching pad from Sri Lanka to the vast Indian subcontinent. That was the objective. And thereafter, we signed a free trade agreement with Pakistan. In similar way, we can export, Sri Lanka can export more than 4,000 products to the Pakistan market at duty free. Then we have South Asian free trade area among the SAARC member countries, 7 member countries, except those products in their sensitive list or the negative list. Sri Lanka can export more than, again, 4,500 products to SAARC member countries. Then we have the Asia Pacific Trade Agreement. That is mainly through the Asia Pacific Trade Agreement we gain access, Sri Lanka gain access to the vast markets in South Korea and China. Now we can export to both countries. That is not a duty-free agreement. We have to pay a certain amount of duty, but it is not zero, but not the MFN rate among between these two. So we can export more than 2,000 products to these two main markets in the East Asia at a preferential duty. And we are making, our exporters are making use of these two agreements to export number of products to these two markets. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Dharmapriya. So I think we got a glimpse of the policy side and the actual agreements and things that are in place from the government and then the key stakeholders. Now let me bring the private sector involved. Wish, I think as a leading conglomerate, there is a diverse set of businesses that involve trade as well. Could you give some context of how the three elements of export, import and sort of domestic production really takes place in an organization like yours, and maybe that'll set good context for our investors tuned in as well.
Thank you, Shiran. Secretary DG and my colleague from private sector colleague from SHARE. I'm happy to be in this trade session. So to talk about Sunshine Holdings, it started off as a small family enterprise 50 years back, mainly started off in trading. Today it has three verticals, healthcare, consumer, and agri. In the healthcare sector, it's a large import and distribution business in the pharmaceuticals and medical devices. So we import from all over the world different pharmaceutical molecules. Similarly, different equipment from all over the world, it's imported and distributed in the entire Sri Lanka. So it gives true meaning to this trade session on the business that we do in our healthcare business. Recently, we have also ventured into manufacturing of pharmaceutical products in Sri Lanka. Moving on to consumer, today we are the single largest branded tea player, taking a Sri Lankan product, adding value and marketing in Sri Lanka. So we have three large brands that takes up almost 35% of the branded tea market. Similarly, we are in the confectionery business. And confectionery includes boiled candy, chocolates, and wafer biscuits. Lastly, agriculture. Agriculture involves palm oil production. And we have a state-of-the-art dairy business which produces over 20,000 liters of fresh milk. So like you said, we are in the import and distribution, manufacturing, also marketing of branded products, and then also in the agricultural business. So that's in a nutshell what Sunshine Holdings does.
Thanks, Vish. And Shia, maybe if I get you at this point, I think having a brand that is very strong locally and also exports in many countries, maybe you can really give a flavor of how the private sector setting up here can really use it as a base to go overseas as well.
Good morning, I guess, to everybody. So the CBR Group is largely a food conglomerate that has manufacturing capabilities in many sectors in the food industry. We have brands that are market leaders in Sri Lanka in many other categories, which we operate, which include biscuits, chocolates, cereal products, coconut products, and unorganic fruits, processed organic fruits and spices. We are a large local manufacturing company with several factories in Sri Lanka, but also having factories in Bangladesh, Myanmar, and Ghana. We are also the largest exporter of confectionery and coconut milk out of Sri Lanka. So we actually have exposure in a lot of trade activities because a lot of our raw materials are imported. But at the same time, we have a large agri presence where we have a very buoyant backward integration process into locally processed raw materials. So in the food space, to answer your question, Shiran, there are very few manufacturers that add value. You have some MNCs who have been in the country for a long time, and you have local players like ourselves, like Sunshine and a few others. But value addition in the food manufacturing space is wide open, I would say. The agri supply chains are the value addition is limited, and the infrastructure that you have in these areas are also limited. So there is a large opportunity for people to come into the FMCG sector here in Sri Lanka.
Great. Thanks, Shia. So let me just get into a few questions, maybe have 1 minute each for the panelists to respond. Secretary Jayawardena, I think we're having right now a trade policy that is being formulated by the Trade Ministry, a lot of input going into that. Maybe for the investors tuning in, how is that process going, and maybe what can we really get out of it for driving the trade agenda?
Yes. The trade policy formation progress giving 4 pillars, 4 special areas: internal trade, international trade, services in trade, and legal reform. Now, the 25 expert committee comprised to making the trade policy, and also we hope to get public and chambers to get their ideas to improve this trade policy. And also the policy is expected to unlock untapped trade and export potentials, upgrade competitiveness, promote value addition, acquire non-traditional trade areas, acquire technology, and also we hope to enhance foreign direct investment. And I need to tell the Trade Ministry has started export processing villages, converting rural, backward and poverty-stricken villages into export process zones to get for them the lucrative livelihood.
Thanks. So I think that sets a bit of insight into the trade policy which is taking place, and I think that is something for the investors to really monitor coming out. Mr. Dharmapi, I think you mentioned a lot about the trade agreements, in particular on the goods side. How do you think trade agreements will work in the current context of attracting more investments coming in, and kind of how it will play with the goods, services, and investment side of it?
Theoretically, now let me give an example for us to understand it in simple manner. Suppose I am importing a product from a particular country because there is a free trade agreement between the country I am living and with the other country I am going to import for the mass market. So when a country, a person tries to import product from another country, not like earlier, he has to look at the import duty scenario. Earlier we had one duty scenario. Now, in the present day, because some of the members countries are members of the number of free trade agreements, so therefore I have to look at the import duty applicable to the country from where I am going to import the product. So if that, because I need to assess the landed price of the product, in terms of the landed price of the product, then only I feel whether it is more economical for me to import from country A or whether country B or country C. Now suppose I am, after some time I am trying to go to the country which has been supplying, and I am trying to establish a factory there. Then at that point of time, maybe a joint venture with my exporter there, or a separate new entity to manufacture and import the product from that country to our country. Then what I am looking at, because the two countries are having a free trade agreement, I am looking at, to take my investment decisions, I am looking at the investment chapter of the free trade agreement and the commitments, and the services chapter of the free trade agreements and the commitment schedules. So because I am interested in whether 100% ownership is assured there, why 100% ownership assured there, and what are the, and how about the foreign exchange regulation, whether can I bring my capital and the profit without any hassles from that country to outside, and whether I am in a position to bring my foreign what you call the specialists and the managers to run the business. Likewise, number of relevant factors and the areas are listed and covered in this investment chapter and the services chapter. Those are very important, because why this scheduling is done. Scheduling is done with the commitments of the countries is to ensure predictability and also the transparency. Some might say we don't want free trade agreement, but we open up these facilities, or this particular regime is all the country. But there is a difference, because when these scheduling or the commitments are in a free trade agreement, I cannot change those things. We need the consent of the other party or parties to change these commitments. So that is very important thing in terms of predictability and the transparency. That is a sine qua non in the international trade. So there is a very great link between these three areas. Trade lead into investment, and thereafter moving into the different services areas. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Dharmapi. I think that was a good explanation of the nexus between these three and how Sri Lanka is also really looking at it more to enhance its landscape. Vish and Shia, if I can bring you both in, I think there's a lot of excitement with the global talk of the trade shifts taking place globally, and whether Sri Lanka can be a real benefactor in this trend, which now seems to be a bit more of a medium to long-term trend. Are you all seeing signs of maybe attracting some of this potential trade, both in terms of domestic manufacturing here and investment, or is it too early to say? How is it from practically from your end?
Do you want me to go first?
Sure, go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead, Chair.
I think what the opportunity is, people had a view of, when it came to supply chains, sourcing for supply chains, very often they would look at the most economical. But right now, what the pandemic has shown us is you really need to diversify your supply chains. And I think that gives countries like Sri Lanka a huge opportunity to be a player. Sri Lanka generally is not the cheapest place to do business, but we have a lot of positives. So I believe that there is opportunity to make some of these trade shifts happen. And we are also, you're going to see a lot of development taking place in Asia and Africa. That's where the growth is set to happen going forward, which also lends itself. Sri Lanka is very strategically placed to access East Africa and many parts of Asia. Bish?
Yeah, so I think the perfect example is in the pharmaceutical side, and I think people are seeing that in the vaccination manufacture. It's now, because of COVID, etc. One is the need for vaccination and the logistics of it being manufactured in large facilities versus individual places where it can be moved around. So I think in the pharmaceutical sector, we'll probably have a lot of opportunity where people would want to come and have JVs in Sri Lanka. One is for the local consumption and also maybe export to the other side. Similarly, I'm sure other sectors as well, like what Shreya said, COVID has really shown us that supply chain really matters, and you cannot have all your eggs in one basket in one place. So Sri Lanka has to really showcase the ability, especially the literacy rate and easy to manufacture access, our zones that we have for manufacturing, all that needs to be shown. Few things that I think will need to be fixed. I think our labor laws still are quite stringent compared to the rest of the. So maybe that needs to be part of a greater agenda, and maybe Madam Secretary, part of the 25-member committee that you were talking about in trade liberalization, that can be looked at as something that can be changed so that we can attract more people to come and invest in Sri Lanka.
Thanks, Vish. So in my final question to, I think, the panelists, maybe I can get Secretary to maybe answer this as well. There are a lot of, beyond the trade policy and beyond what we were talking about, there are certain trade facilitation measures also being undertaken. Maybe you can give a bit of glimpse of some of these measures and how it's helping us being globally competitive.
Yes. The Sri Lanka is strategically situated in the Indian Ocean. We have a lot of potential to develop our country through exports. The whole country forecasts to develop export sector and also the new legislation recently adopted by Parliament to manage port city will establish a one-stop services center. Then Sri Lanka can replicate that model across the country. Then we hope to develop all the country through export income.
Great. And if I may ask Mr. Dharmapiya, in terms of trade digitalization and promoting digitalization, I think this crisis has highlighted better than ever how immediate we need to respond. As a member or the co-chair of the National Trade Facilitation Committee, maybe if you could just tell our audience some of the measures, especially on the digitalization side, that's taking place.
Because when we encountered this unexpected, unprecedented COVID pandemic all over the world, then the question was to run the office with the regular staff. Whether we were not able to run the office with the regular staff on a particular day, I can remember I had to run the office only with 4 members to issue the certificates of origin under different free trade agreements and also the GSP schemes to about 150, 200 certificates of origin a day. So what we set up is now we requested our exporters to scan the document and it is not really high-level digitalization, but depending on the circumstances and the context in which we are working, because the manual signature is still necessary for for almost all the certificates of origin issued by us, because we have to somebody, an authorized officer, should manually sign the certificate of origin. So officers got the scanned copies from the exporters direct to their home, and they check check the certificates of origin and inform us, and then send a message to the exporters, your certificate is in order, then submit. And so within a matter of few minutes, then we were able to sign an issue with the certificates of origin to ensure a smooth flow of goods at difficult times out of Sri Lanka. At that time, we were all focusing on how to facilitate export. That is one real example we encountered under this COVID pandemic situation. And thereafter, even I can remember the custom department also accepted the e-cusdex system. And in addition, for the registration of companies with our department, we now, with only one single document, hard copy, we do the registration. No one should come to the department. They can do the registration and get the registered number from the department while working at their offices. So, and other thing is the Sri Lanka Trade Information Portal that contains import and export procedure and transit trade related rules and regulations relating to 41 organizations. So therefore, exporters or the importers, they need not to come to our office or any other office, regulatory bodies, to get the information, so that they can visit Sri Lanka Trade Information Portal and get the required documents. Now we have added recently another new dimension called step-by-step procedure for about 30 new products, where exporters and importers are given step by step what do they do to import and or export their products. These are some of the salient features.
Thanks, Ramvi. I think that highlights both the agility and also kind of the new measures in place, especially the trade information portal, which I think is very valuable to the traders as well as the private sector. Shia and Vish, maybe in kind of your closing remarks as well, if you could maybe highlight, I think that you have the pandemic challenges, but also you have the private sector resilience, which is really being shown, and the potential. So maybe between these three, if you could, in your closing remarks, sort of highlight how the private sector is adopting, and also some of the new things that they're bringing about, and the overall potential that there is to enhance trade. I think, Shia, you mentioned about food manufacturing value add. I think things like that would be really interesting for our investors to really listen into as well.
Okay, so I'll go first. So in terms of, I think the DG was talking about agility, and you can see the private sector, especially in the healthcare and food sectors, didn't miss a beat. Our staff were out there even in the middle of the pandemic, and they were able to get in orders, especially to the supermarkets, etc., which were doing online deliveries, making sure the products from our warehouses were delivered on time, and they were able to get the products out. Similarly, the importation or the exportation didn't stop. All our factories, the tea manufacturing factories, continued to work around the clock and at less staff than we would normally use to get the products out. So I think in terms of learning, there was the learning curve was very shortened on how to work on a digital space. I mean, as what we are doing today, we are connected from around the world to this conference. Similarly, most of our office functions are done through digital. How we communicate with each other, how we communicate to the factory staff is done a lot more digitally than before. So I think the Sri Lankan businesses have been very quickly able to adapt to this situation and carry on with our trade practices during this entire year and 2 months that we have been in the pandemic.
Thanks, Vish. Shia?
Yeah, so to add to that, yes, the pandemic, brought head-on challenges in supply chain and processes related to that. But one of the things that we saw was huge resilience. As Bish said, is getting things done and adapting. So if I were to look at our manufacturing, I mean, we are a large exporter. We were able to, get a lot of our documentation done digitally, which was not there before. Supply chains were very constrained, but we put a lot of energy and effort into making safe work environment, and we have a very educated workforce, and because they felt safe, they came to work. Also, communication in Sri Lanka, we have a high literacy rate, and spoken English is also quite good. So we had our staff engaging with our export buyers to manage the supply chain difficulties that we were faced. So all in all, I know, I mean, we didn't lose business because of the pandemic. We certainly had challenges, but because it was handled professionally and we were able to adapt very quickly, we were able to see change. So the CBA Group are also partners with SPAR supermarkets. And there again, digital ordering in supermarkets was very small. It still is very small. But what the pandemic made businesses do is they fast-tracked many things in their businesses. And Sri Lanka was no different to what happened globally. I mean, globally, they said, there was an increase in business in the food sector by over 25%. That's what a lot of our customers say, and that's what the numbers. And in Sri Lanka was no different. And I think in a country where you have 25% of the workforce engaged in agriculture, but it yields only 7% of GDP, there is huge potential for people to come in and invest in this space. We have over 30 to 40% post-harvest loss. And I think enabling technology in these traditional areas is where we're going to see productivity and efficiency increase. So again, I think huge potential areas for investment in the future.
Thanks, Shia. So with that, let me thank my panelists for, I think, valuable remarks on the policy side, what's going on, some of the trade facilitation measures, the trade agreements, and on the private sector side, really giving an idea of some of the opportunities, the resilience that the private sector has brought in, the digitization. I think really giving our investors, our audience, a snapshot of how Sri Lanka's trade landscape is and is evolving. And with that, let me conclude this session and thank you for tuning in.